Hello and welcome to Life Lessons with Dr. Cunningham, where who you are matters more than what you do. I am so excited today because we are having an awesome discussion about yoga. You all, yoga has been around since the beginning of time, and it's quite beneficial, not only for flexibility, and we know that flexibility can be beneficial in many different ways, but that was on a different conversation that we had on one of those episodes. At the same time, it's great for our reduction of stress, and it can be great for our mental health. And so I have someone here with me today who is a yoga enthusiast. I mean, has been practicing yoga for years at this point, and she also is a dear friend. We actually met each other in New Hampshire while I was obtaining my doctorate in marriage and family therapy over at Antioch University, New England. And her name is Dr. Alicia Bosley, who is currently a new associate professor and graduate director of marriage and family therapy program at Hofstra University. She earned her PhD in couple and family therapy from Nova Southeastern University. She also holds a master's in couple and family therapy from Antioch University, New England, and a bachelor's of science in human development and family studies from Colorado State University. She teaches courses related to couple and family therapy, systemic assessment, individual and family development, diversity and social justice, and sociocultural factors in therapy. She also teaches in the LGBTQIA plus studies minor at Hofstra and was part of a committee which developed an interdisciplinary certificate program in advanced LGBTQIA health. She has a small private practice in New York State, specializing in individual and couple therapy, as well as LGBTQIA plus clients. And so welcome, Alicia.
Thank you. It's so great to be here, Norja.
I'm so glad that you're here today. And I'm excited. I'm already feeling like I'm preparing myself to, go into like a downward dog pose, or what is it, the warrior stance.
Yes.
You know a lot more than I do. I've only gone to about 2 or 3 yoga classes, which is the reason why I called you, girl.
You just named two of the most powerful poses. So you know what you're doing
Wow.
when you're giving yourself credit for it.
Really?
Absolutely.
I didn't even know which one was powerful. That's all I can remember. Again, the downward dog, isn't that a part of touching your toes?
It is where you touch your toes and then you kind of flow outwards. So, maybe it's, you don't even realize this on a conscious level. Maybe that's where you feel powerful and that's why you remember them.
Oh my gosh. See, I don't know if we want to go into an analysis of why I feel powerful in the downward dog.
Hey, wherever you're
excuse me, you all. Her and I we're catching up because during COVID, we haven't seen each other as often as we have. I mean, sincerely, Alicia is an awesome person and a great friend, and also it knows yoga extensively. But the last time we actually spent time with each other face to face was during like a Juneteenth weekend, and it was just, she's a great person to be able to spend time with. So just to focus on the specifics of today, which is yoga, I would like to ask you to share with the audience your experience regarding yoga. Like, why'd you even, start yoga, and what has kept you going over the years?
Oh, this is taking us way back, way before I even met you. So when I was a teenager, actually, my mother practiced yoga with my aunt. And at the time I thought it was like, hippy dippy crap for middle-aged women. And now that I am approaching my 40s and middle age, maybe it is hippy dippy crap for middle-aged women. But I slowly would just have it come up more and more often. People would be like, oh, I practice yoga. I love it. It's great. And I went through my little workout phase where I was going to the gym and I loved lifting weights and I loved doing cardio and I loved doing all that. And that was great. And I still enjoy that. But it's so physical. And I felt like I was getting into this very like physical, like, wow, look at me. I'm tough and whatever. And that's just not me, or it's not all me. Like I am very creative. I like, I've always liked art and nature and things, as you and I were catching up a minute ago about Norja, the last time we had together, getting in
Mhm.
touch with all of that is important to me. And finally, I would say in my early 20s, maybe right around the age of 20, I stopped fighting it.
Mm, mhm.
And I did my first yoga class, and it was literally like, in a movie where they'll, zoom in on your face and you're like, oh my gosh, I had one of those, oh my gosh moments. And it was just like, oh, I can actually feel in touch with my body and with my soul. And I know how cheesy that sounds, but it was just the truth. It was just like, whoa. And over the years, obviously, that's developed. The type of yoga I do now that I'm again reaching middle age is a little different. It's a little
Mhm.
slower, it's a little flowier. It's not as much like, okay, bend over, touch your toes, jump forward, leap through. It's not as active. It's more about stretching and lengthening and getting.
Ah, so then you went from yoga line dancing to like yoga flow.
Yes, yes. Oh my gosh, I love that
So it's
yoga line dancing.
because it sounds like touch your toes and move your hips and okay. So then what I'm wondering though is what type of yoga are you speaking of? Because I don't know the difference between all the yoga. The only one I know about that's popular was Bikram because they just put you in like this hot room and everybody's sweaty and I can't imagine because I'm thinking about the germs.
Yes, it is definitely not. That's a great place to start, actually. So we can go kind of in rough level of intensity. So
Great,
yes,
awesome.
Norja, you bring up one of the most intense, if not the most intense. It is sweaty. It is hot. You are in a room that is, I want to say 110 degrees, but I'm probably getting that wrong. Point being, it is a very hot room and it's intended to capture the natural like climate of the areas in India where it was developed. So you do feel like you are, on a mountaintop, a very sweltering mountaintop. And yes, all the sweat and all the sense of a bunch of people sweating together. And yeah, the germiness. What I will say is, I am not a heat friendly person. I grew up in Colorado, as you mentioned earlier. I live in New York now. I can be in heat somewhat, but I get real grumpy. I'm just not predisposed to working in that. But what I will say is you will sweat a gallon and then you feel so good after. So Bikram is really great because it gives you a number of benefits. You're not actually moving that quickly in it. You can't, it's too warm for that. And this is my cat, Salem. I am sorry, everybody.
Hi, Salem. That's a fabulous cat.
Yes, well, I'll just acknowledge his presence there. But you are not moving as quickly as some of the others, but your heart rate gets going up and your body heat gets going up as if you were. So it's got some great cardiovascular benefits. It's got some great physical benefits, even though you're not moving like crazy. It also allows you to get into some poses that you wouldn't naturally either. So one of the things that we were talking about, Norja and I, before we jumped on here, is that, yeah, yoga is not about touching your toes, but I think everybody, if we're going to be honest, wants to at least try to touch their toes. Bikram is great because it does allow you to get a little bendier than you would naturally because your muscles are so warm and flexible, which also means you need to be more careful. But that's Bikram, and I just went on a whole tangent about that. So I will try to cliff notes the rest of these a little bit more, but that's Bikram. Then there is Ashtanga, which is kind of the yoga line dancing that you were mentioning before,
Mhm.
Dr. Cunningham, where you flow your poses together, but it is a lot of standing and jumping and moving. I mean, you're basically doing a push-up so that's where the vinyasa style gets its name, which I'll touch on in a minute. The vinyasa push-up. So I would demonstrate, but I can't do that and talk at the same time. So you get in a plank position and then you push down and forward and up. So you go almost from like a plank to a push-up to like the way we all think of seals, when they're balancing the ball on their nose. So maybe I can demonstrate that later, but you're flowing through that and then you go back up into the downward facing dog, where a lot of us probably feel more powerful than we may want to admit. And then you're coming back up to your feet and you're reaching up and then you flow down and do the whole thing over again. So that is great cardio workout. It will get your heart beating. It's great for building strength and muscle ability and stamina. And it's a really great workout. So that's for all the people that want to feel like I got a workout in addition to the stretch. So I think there's that idea that yoga is all about stretching, which is a lot of it, but it's not all of it. So Ashtanga is kind of your workout. Then there's Vinyasa, which is like Ashtanga, just I would say Ashtanga light. It's a little less focused on getting your heart rate up and more focused on flowing your moves together. So it's like more of a pretty dance instead of a rapid, powerful, like fiery dance. Then slowing down a little bit more, we get into Hatha, which is probably the most common form of yoga. So if you just drop in and do a yoga class, you've probably done Hatha, where you're focused very much on your breath and on your poses. Usually you'll hold each pose for about 8 breaths, which usually ends up being, I would say, 16 to 20 seconds. And you're focused on getting your alignment right and moving in time with your breath. So it's, again, this very focused, calming way of attending to how am I feeling? How am I moving my body in this moment? How does that impact how I feel? You slow down a little bit more from Hatha and you get more into, let's see, there is Iyengar, which is also really, really focused on alignment and making sure that you are doing the poses in the kind of very traditional, I would say almost orthodox way, although using the term orthodox feels a little weird for yoga, at least to me. But it's really focused on making sure that you are getting the shape that's right for your body and the pose. Yeah. Then
That's
you slow down.
interesting.
Go ahead.
Well, that's very interesting. I was not aware that yoga, or there was a form of yoga that actually focused on what shape works best for your body.
Yes.
Now, can you explain a little more about that? I'm sure I probably, interjected when you were about to.
No, I think that's great. You know me, I love the questions and I love the conversations. So there is, and this is a newer approach. I think, maybe 20, 30 years ago, when I was not practicing, so I can't speak entirely to this. I think it was more on like, we need to get everybody to have the same shape. And more recently, there has been a lot of research on anatomy and individual anatomy, right? So we all have slightly different shapes. Your downward dog, Norja, is going to look different than mine because we have different bodies. We both know that we're not the same height, but
My downward dog is gonna look the bomb. That's all I'm saying.
I totally trust you there.
I'm joking.
No, you can't take that back. You know it's the truth. We both know it's the truth. And your audience knows that's the truth. Your downward dog will be on point. But at the end of the day, the way your hips connect to your knees is going to be different than your hips connect to my knees, which is why yours is going to be the bomb. And something else, right? But
I'm sure yours is going to look fabulous, like a ballerina's.
There we go. A ballerina and a beautiful, can I say bad ASS on here? I don't know.
Oh, yeah, I mean, yeah, I've had people on that, they say their words. So you would look like a Barbie. You would look like a Barbie in downward dog.
Love it. So we've got a Barbie and you're the badass. So but it's a really great movement in yoga, I think, because again, we don't all need to look like a badass. Some of us are going to look like a badass. Some of us are going to look like a Barbie. Some of us are going to look like a ballerina. Some of us are going to look like, I don't know, a flamingo. And it's all okay because we've got to look at the way our bodies work together. And so just to give you an example, I used to drive myself crazy when I was a kid because I took ballet and I took jazz and all those dance things. And I could do the splits, front and back, but I could never do them side to side. And I was like, at the time, I thought I was embarrassingly high up. I had other girls that could just drop down into it in class. And I was like, what's wrong? And so I worked and I worked and I worked and I worked on it at home. And I just never really got closer to being able to do the middle, or like it's called straddle splits.
The straddle.
And now that we've got this research, I'm realizing, I was never going to be able to do that because it wasn't about the flexibility of my muscles or my tendons. It's literally the way my legs and my hips and all of those bones align.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
So
new information, but that makes sense though, because I would, based on your anatomy or, how your body is shaped, I would think that you would be able to do a straddle, especially if you were a dancer. Like when I growing up, my mom had me in dance classes. I went to like tap and ballet, but ballet ended very quickly. Mom knew when she put me in a tutu and saw the way my thighs were set up, the ballet just was not it. But then I liked to dance. But I also literally, when I was a child, I couldn't really do the splits like you're saying, just like the regular. I could do the splits, but it was like it wasn't as well as me straddling. I actually was better at a straddle. Like I would literally just sit in a straddle and just put my hands on my face, or my hands on my face and my elbows on the floor, and I would watch TV when I was a little kid.
uh, see, I would have been so jealous
But it's
between,
anatomy.
yeah, it's anatomy,
It's anatomy.
you and I can just divide and conquer there, but or divide
Exact collaboration. So
exactly.
you next time we have to go into a dance competition, we can do splits. I'll do the straddle, you're gonna do the other split.
Perfect. Done. They won't know what hit them.
We're gonna be the 21st century salt and pepper. That's what when we're gonna do in a dance competition.
You just made my whole evening. So there's some really great work on that out there. And I cannot remember the author's name, and I'll send it to you later if you'd care to put it in the comments or something, but there's a really excellent book that talks all about this. It's called Your Body, Your Yoga, and it's all about all the different joints in the body. It is very sciencey, so if you're not into anatomy, I would definitely recommend just getting the Cliff's Notes or something, but it's really great at looking at, well, if your, shin and your shin angles this way and your thigh angles this way and your knees work this way, then these are going to be the poses that are going to be easier for you to do. And so it's a very helpful thing than trying to kind of force everybody to look exactly the same in the poses. And I'm 1000% here for it.
Yeah, and I think it's awesome that yoga is acknowledging the individuality of bodies, and it's not only from a biological standpoint, but it's beneficial socially as well. To be able to acknowledge that everyone is different, and that even if they are going over movements, that some people may move slightly differently, or it may affect everyone differently, but it can still lead to what I've heard before, either like nirvana or like still an opportunity for namaste. And so I don't know if you've gone through all of the different stages or different sort of intensity levels of yoga, because I'm wondering about, from your perspective, like the spiritual experience with regards to yoga.
Excellent question. So I do find that all of them give me a little different connection with spirituality. I do think they all connect me on some level, even the hot, sweaty Ashtanga, or active, hot, sweaty Ashtanga, and the very sweaty, hot, oh my gosh, am I going to pass out? It still has this really deep connection with your body and with kind of that aspect of what I would consider to be spiritual. It's not so much about a specific belief, but that reconnection to yourself as a physical, emotional, spiritual being. So I think there is nothing more powerful than, again, in those super hot Bikram classes, it's disgusting because you're all sweating and smelling and whatever together, but you are all doing it together, and you get to this point where it just doesn't matter as much. I think there are some people that are like, no, I can never be in a room with someone else's sweat, and that's okay. But if you do, you realize you're like, oh my gosh, I can hear my neighbor breathing with me, and we're like not even trying to align our breath, but it's happening, and this is really cool.
Mhm.
There's definitely something spiritual about feeling yourself moving and getting into these, again, like the warrior, feeling like, oh, I feel strong right now, just having my arm out like this. And I'm sure the angle looks hilarious to those of you that might be watching, but having my arm out like this, I mean, right now I can feel the energy kind of coming out, whereas if I'm up and a little bit more graceful, that's a different energy, and you feel that, and you feel connected to whatever you see as kind of being that higher power in your life, I think. There's
Right,
also
right.
something really soothing, and I promise to get off my soapbox then. There are two more forms that I was thinking of, one of which being yin, which is my personal favorite these days. It is really good for getting into the really deeper connective tissue. So you're not working so much with your muscles there, but you're working with the ligaments and the tendons and the basically the parts of your body that kind of contain the rest of it. So you get in a pose and you hold it for like 5 minutes. And it's intense.
Mm,
You don't go in as deep. So again, this is not where you're trying to touch your toes. You might be reaching to
mhm.
your knees, and that's enough because you want to go a little less so that you can just kind of relax, and slowly you let gravity and time do the work for you. And eventually you're like, oh crap, I'm touching my toes. In fact, I can fit my whole hand under there, and I've never touched my toes before. Like, it's very different, but those 5 minutes in a pose, or sometimes it's three, you're really alone by yourself with your breath. And it becomes so meditative and so lovely. And that's where I think, again, like that spirituality and that connection to kind of the more deep meaning, rather than just like, oh, let's get a good workout in, that you hear about from the
Mm.
original yoga. And then the last is restorative. Oh, and I lied. There's restorative, which is kind of like yin, but it's more about kind of bringing back. It's really good for after an injury. You know, you get into a pose to help kind of stretch and soften the muscle around it, but in a very, very slow way. So you're not
Mhm.
forcing that body part to recover. Or if you've had a cold, you know, you're not stretching up and trying to force your chest to expand. You're opening a little bit, you're laying back, and you're inviting your chest to expand. And if it wants to, great. And if it doesn't, that's not the day. And then last but not least is yoga nidra, which is literally you lie on the ground and you meditate. And that's, of course, purely spiritual, right? So I think as you go through the levels of physical intensity, you're kind of going in that inverse direction with your spiritual intensity and that mindfulness that a lot of people talk about with yoga as well.
Mhm. I think what you shared has been very helpful because I was just schooled in yoga because I've learned different forms of meditation, but not necessarily the meditation with movement or all the different phases or different levels of yoga. So that was awesome, Alicia, Dr. Alicia, excuse me, Dr. Bosley. So thank you so much for sharing that. There's also a part of me that still wonders if there's still, that the spiritual aspect of yoga has to do with each person, meaning like I'm thinking about it from the standpoint of whether one is just lying on the ground and meditating, or even if they are doing Bikram, that all of them can still be very spiritual, whether it's on an individual level or on a communal level. Because I
Mm.
think there's something to be said about what you said before. Like, for example, even though I'm a germaphobe, it depends upon if I'm going to Bikram and I happen to know the people in the class and we're all kind of breathing intensely and a part of that same experience. Because in a way, I would almost kind of like I don't want to necessarily utilize it as a metaphor but to say or the analogy of the Bikram yoga being like going through a doctoral program with your cohort, like then that then it is a spiritually communal experience. And it's like it's the suffering as well as the triumphs, as well as the strength, and the community of, the faith that's required to get through the process together, like, and also the individual, um, acknowledgement of that moment, as well as what you learn about yourself through the process. Like, so that analogy, like, it's totally sounded spiritual. And then if we were to go even further and think about it from the standpoint of like the chakras and like what's required to really be aligned and then to almost unblock those chakras and those what's happening spiritually, like to create more movement energetically within the body, like yoga has such great benefit. And I can only imagine, like, even how yoga has been helpful to you and what you're aware of as far as how it's helped other people. Like, so I'm wondering if you don't mind sharing whatever you feel comfortable with, whether it's like, someone else that you've known, or if it's you specifically, as far as how yoga has been, beneficial during what sort of times was it the most beneficial, or, how has it helped you through anything in particular?
What a wonderful question. And I really genuinely mean that. I'm not just saying it as a kind of knee-jerk response. It really is a great question. And I loved your analogy too. I think getting through a Bikram class with a lot of people that maybe know somewhat well or not so well is a lot like getting through a doctoral program with your cohort. You're like, oh my gosh, we made it. We made it. Is a spot on metaphor. And yeah, I think there is an element of that, especially with the more intense forms, right? So the Bikram and the heat and the Ashtanga and just that intensity, or the yin, which is a very different, but I would say maybe even more intense than the super physical, where you're just like, whew, I hate that pose. And I just held it for 10 minutes. Like, what? And I feel great. So there is absolutely that like personal and interpersonal spirituality, right? And you're absolutely right that it can help people get through things. So I guess I'll start off on the, kind of the other people that I've seen benefit from this. So when I was actually doing my master's internship back in New Hampshire, where we were, I was at a residential placement for teenage boys. And some of them are there for, they were all there for different reasons, right? Some of them were there because they needed a more supportive school environment. Some of them were there because they had some emotional or behavioral things going on. Some of them had specific family issues going on, so they needed to be again in a different environment, but they were all there to kind of work through some of their own things. And one of my tasks as the new intern was I was supposed to help run groups, and I realized, after a while, I'm like, they're not really sitting still, and then, I'm thinking about it. I'm like, well, of course, they're like teenage boys. Like teenage boys don't sit still. And of course, that's a huge generalization, but I think it's fairly true. Even when I was 13, I don't know if I would have wanted to sit around for an hour talking about feelings. And so I would just bring some basic moves in, and again, they've got energy. So I'm like, all right, let's do a lot of warriors, and let's do a lot of chaturanga, which is the flowing thing that I was mentioning earlier, the flowing process. And I'm not going to say it was me, right? Like this was not an experimental condition where there was nothing else going on. Maybe they had really good days at school. Maybe the food those weeks was better or whatever. But I do feel like when we did that, they had an easier time talking. Like there was just like that little more chill and that like better supportive energy when they did start talking about feelings. It was like less jokey, like, you're a wimp for feeling that way or whatever. And it was like, oh yeah, I hear you. I felt that too. Like I definitely think there was a change. And if yoga was a 0.0005% of that, great. And, I will add to that I always joke about this with, friends and whoever asks me really, I don't always notice feeling way better on the days that I do manage to fit in some yoga, but I definitely notice on the days that I don't. Like, I'm like, I just need to bring myself down a couple notches. I'm getting way too worried about this one thing or whatever. So yes, I do think it can have that personal or interpersonal impact, and then we take that out into the world too, right? So I was having a good day, but you and I got on this podcast and we started chatting and catching up a little bit, and suddenly I'm extra glowy, I'm extra happy. And so I think there is, that connection that we get from one another. And you and I are speaking through Zoom. I mean, imagine if we were here in person. And I think that's, again, like you said, one of those things where you're in a yoga class and you're all going through it together. I think that's one of the best things.
Well, I just want to respond by saying this, that I'm glad that you feel extra glowy because we're having a conversation. Because when I speak to you, I feel extra glowy myself. It's always nice catching up with you, sincerely. And it reminds me of, like, it may be a tangent, but I'm okay with sharing this on the channel if you're okay with it. But when we were in New Hampshire, because New Hampshire, and it's considered a rural city, but at the same time, it was like everyone was from a different place, different state, and didn't know anyone until we joined the program and had our cohort connections. But then, we started having little socials, and sometimes I would have people come over to my apartment. We would have dinner and just, have great conversations. And literally it was probably, the best meeting of the minds. And it was all of this powerful feminine energy that was in a room, because when I remember now, like, we didn't have a lot of guys in our programs, and the ones of us that actually lived in Keene were the females, and we all got along so well. I mean, it wasn't catty, like, it was just all love. It really was. Like, and it was so positive that those meetings and those connections, and those interactions still remain with me, which even empowers me to know even more so how much, women are able to collaborate, and for woman empowerment to really have a strong effect on our society, in order to, go against some of the social injustices, and I don't mean to go in like a completely different spin, but I know that this is like a realm that you enjoy to discuss, because after Antioch and also Nova, like, social justice is major, and to see the impact that, women who work together effectively and to collaborate to bring our positive impact to the world means that we can exponentially even have a greater impact, on our communities, and globally, as far as I'm concerned. But, matter of fact, we're working on with my practice a mental health initiative in Ghana. So we're going to speak further about that if you would like to join next summer.
Yes, I would love that. Thank you.
Yeah, so we're gonna have more of a conversation, because I already know it is. We're gonna be able to really share a lot of great information, and it'll be fun at the same time.
Yes.
And we're gonna have to at least go on one safari. Like, I'm not going to Africa and not going to.
Yeah, no, that's a requirement.
Alicia's like, we're not discussing that here on this platform, okay? So you. I hear you, Alicia. Excuse me, Dr. Bosley.
No, Alicia is fine.
I know that was a complete tangent, but at the same time, it really is irrelevant, because, like, it really is a relevant point, because sometimes there are particular social, like, dominant discourses, because I know you know narrative, and we teach theory all the time, so we're like theory nerds. Yeah. So, to change the dominant narrative a lot of times has to do with people witnessing and experiencing a completely new narrative, and to see women who are, standing in their own power, knowledgeable, confident, and then we're able to work together and to collaborate, like, unstoppable.
Seriously unstoppable.
Mhm.
And you're absolutely right. I think, like you were mentioning, like, it's when we were getting together for those meetings at Antioch, I almost said in Antioch, no, in New Hampshire, when we were in Antioch, I still remember that, going to your apartment, I still remember you had that, like, nice little deck in the backyard, and you had your music stuff out, and we would all just chill and talk out and hang. Exactly like you said, you would think getting a bunch of women together in that, like, space, like, this stereotype, that dominant narrative is that there would be drama, and there'd be cattiness, and there'd be pettiness, and just, like, it would get messy, and it never ever was.
Never was, like, and we really genuinely had a great time. I mean, it was like between, like, professors and students, and we're talking about masters, doctoral students, and professors, and we were all, like, getting along, having great conversations that turned into great opportunities for, like, research opportunities, and projects, and, like, study buddies. Like, it was such a great time. And my hope is that we'll continue to be able to build a community, like, even through this platform. And also, the encouragement is that beyond the platform is that if you are inspired to start your own community, I mean, because it's the way for us to be able to continue to have a positive impact in the world that we live in today is for us to have conversations like this. Meaning, like, for example, we're having a discussion about yoga, but I purposefully enjoy having an open mind. And it also does speak to my hippie side. I'm not going to lie, Alicia. I know you were saying at the beginning, it was like, you felt like it was hippie like, but I do think that yoga has, some spiritual implications, but then also physically, mentally, and emotionally, it's very helpful, for our well being overall. And then, again, being able to be open-minded, even when being considered like, for example, I remember when I first moved to New Hampshire, and especially over at Antioch, and I was like, yeah, I'm a Christian girl. And they were looking at me like, oh, you're a black girl, you're Christian. I don't know. This girl is probably gonna be closed-minded. She's just like probably is prejudiced against particular groups, and we are no particular group, so we're considering. And then to have conversations with me, they were like, no, she's different. Like, we're just cool. She's not like what we thought. And so, I like having those discussions where people are able to see that, truly spiritual people actually are, more open to understanding people. That there's so many, unfortunately, um, barriers that have been created through competition within humanity, than rather than there being understanding and relationship in humanity, and truly looking at the foundation of what spirituality is, like, it having to do with peace, having to do with like love, justice, like all of those are spiritual values from my perspective.
100%. 100%. And I think, yeah, you're so right. Like that is the stereotype, right? Is like, oh, she's a Christian girl. She's going to have certain ideas about whatever. We don't know if this is going to be a good fit. And it's like, no, that's getting away from what that Christian spirituality is, right? Like that beautiful message of love and taking care of one another. And I mean, the term that I hear a lot, with Christianity is brotherhood, but like just personhood, right? Like siblinghood, whatever we were going to use to get away from kind of like that gender language. That's the truth of Christianity, right? And when we
Mhm.
boil that down, it's not so different than the truth of, Islam or the truth of Buddhism or whatever. Sure, they each have their own little bents, but you're absolutely right. That is the fundamental bit of spirituality. And again, like with yoga, if I'm worried about if your downward dog looks better than mine, and I'm like, okay, how can I keep Norja held back so that I look better in this pose? Like that's going so against everything. But if I'm like, wow, that's amazing. Look at her power. I swear we're gonna have to do some kind of joke about downward dog by the end of this. But if I'm like,
You know what? I think we may end up having to, like, do different yoga poses. We're gonna take pictures and then create memes from
love this idea. Yeah.
them.
We'll share it with all of our Antioch crew. And they'll get
Yes. We can't. There's certain angles we can't do on the downward dog though, because I don't know how it's really gonna look. But that's the
yeah.
thing about it. It's like it's not even. We're so focused on the moment with regards to yoga, which is the part that I love about mindfulness. That it's not even about necessarily what it looks like. It's just kind of like it's the moment. What are you experiencing in the moment? How does it feel? Like, what are you noticing about, your experience while you're in the pose, and that's the part that I love about yoga, even though again, I'm not the enthusiast. I've gone to about 5 classes. So
5 classes is great. You can have your enthusiasm about that, and I'll be the yoga enthusiast.
yes, because I didn't realize that you had, been doing yoga ever since what, you were like a teenager? I'm like,
Yeah.
you truly are consistent with the yoga. I think that's awesome.
Thank
And
you.
and to be able to, my final question I'll ask before we kind of start wrapping it up is how did you evolve over the years as a practicer of yoga?
Hmm. I think I did get much more spiritual. Again, I think, I kind of fell into it, like I said, because it was popping up everywhere. And I was like, all right, let me try this. But at the beginning, it very much was like, whoa, I'm connecting with myself, but look at how, you know, look at how good my heartbeat feels now, like look at these little tiny baby muscles I'm building from doing all of these, downward dogs and, chaturanga push-ups. And I think I was more focused on that, but as I've gotten older, I have connected a lot more to the spirituality of it. And I've gotten quieter. So, at the beginning, I would go to those classes that are like, yoga booty boot camp, rock hard abs in 3 weeks or whatever, and those have a place, right? Like they're good. They're, people like to feel like they're getting a good workout. So those are good, but I've gotten away from like, okay, well, this is going to make my butt look really great, to like, this is going to help me connect better to myself, both on a physical level, like looking after myself, taking care of myself, taking care of my health. And it's going to get me more connected to myself, so that, like you said, when I go out and I do this very important work that we both do, that we all do in the world, working for social justice, working for change, working on these things, I have that inner peace and that inner strength that even if I've got somebody who really disagrees with me that we need to make things more accessible for everyone, that we've got a lot of work to do, and they're calling me every name in the book and they're getting in my face, I don't take that personally, and I can be like, you know what, that's okay. I want to hear their thoughts. I want to understand them. And I've got that kind of solid space where I'm like, I can be with this and not get caught up in it and start yelling back, and it's like, oh, you libs this. And I'm like, oh, and
Well, I'll say this is that I'm glad that there is a balance of, there's a sense of duality, like even with regards to spirituality, like yin and yang, if we're looking at it from like the Eastern standpoint. Peace is definitely something that is very important to me. Love is, faith is as well. I still also acknowledge the fact that there are parts of my humanity. And if someone ever did something like that in front of me to you, I probably would have words. I probably would have words, and I'm quite peaceful. I wouldn't yell or anything. I wouldn't even put my hands on them because I'm not going to jail. But at the same time, they shouldn't say anything. Don't mess with Dr. Bosley. And people who know me know, don't ever mess with anybody in my family or any of my friends or people within my community.
I wouldn't mess with Dr. Cunningham. I would never mess with Dr. Cunningham. I remember, and I hope you're okay with me bringing this up, and I won't go into much detail, but I remember the last time you and I were together, there was a gentleman who was quite interested in you, and you handled it like a pro. I think, a lot of us would have gotten.
Are you talking about when we were on the elevator? Are you talking about the guy in the elevator?
That. I love that you remember that.
Oh gosh.
Yes, he was quite a fan of Dr. Cunningham. And I think, some people would have been really rude and just been like, oh no, that was not what I was going for. I think for me, I would have been like, thanks, bye. And you were just super cool, and you held your ground, and you were so nice. And I don't even think he knew what to do, because it was like, oh, she just turned me down flat and I still feel great about myself. Like, it was amazing. So getting back into that duality, and again, kind of like holding your space without trampling on somebody else. Like, you embodied that so much in that moment.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for noticing that, Dr. Bosley. It's been a lifelong process to learn that balance. And I'm working to continue to always master it, because now that we're, 40 plus, it can only get better from this point. And so, I really thank you so much for being here today. Of course, I would like for you to join again if our schedules allow. Now, how are people able to contact you? Say, for example, if they are specifically looking for a therapist, or if they might even be considering joining a marriage and family therapy program over at Hofstra.
Love it. So as of right now, I practice on BetterHelp platforms. So it is betterhelp.com/Alicia_Bosley. I will send you that, because now that I've said that, I'm like, oh gosh, is it underscore? Is it just?
And I'll add it to the comment section or the description. Mhm.
Fantastic. One that I know
Mhm.
like the back of my hand, my email at Hofstra University, if you're interested in becoming a couple and family therapist, if you're interested in just checking it out and seeing what it's about, or if you're looking for therapy from one of our students, is Alicia, ALICIA .A.B as in boy, O as in Sam, LEY at Hofstra, which is a mouthful, HOFSTRA.edu. And I am not currently teaching yoga, but if any of you are on Long Island and care to ever join me at Emerge Fitness and Yoga in Massapequa, that is my jam these days. So thank you, Dr. Cunningham. It was so great catching up and so good talking with you. And I love that we still have the same energy, you know, however many years
Mhm.
past. I know how many years I'm not going to put it.
No, it's yeah, I was gonna say, I moved to New Hampshire, what was it, like 2008? Like September, August, September of 2008. So it's really been a long time. At the same time, it does feel like, every time that we meet, it's almost like we just spoke to each other yesterday or like a week ago, which is awesome, which is the reason why I know when I have genuine connections, because that's how quickly we're able to just reconnect and catch up. So I just want to thank you so much, Dr. Bosley, for being a part of Life Lessons with Dr. Cunningham on today. And also, viewers, I'm going to ask you to please like and subscribe and share the video and watch it over and over again, especially if you are a yoga enthusiast or want to become a yoga enthusiast. And I am just going to tell you all, have a great one until I see you next time. All right.